let me have a look here. There we go. So we're on session 3 today, which is how to hodl. We'll look at how do I store Bitcoin safely? How can you protect it from theft or seizure? And how can you stay private when using Bitcoin? We'll get into some of that in the conversation a little bit later on. And how can I build conviction to hodl? So that's just what we mentioned just there. So let's have a look and see what we've got ready for us. So obviously this is a presentation. We've brought this to you from the guys at Bull Bitcoin. Bull Bitcoin is the best exchange in Canada, period. And one of the reasons is we're a self-custody exchange. So we've talked about sound money. We've talked about freedom. We've talked about how you can hold Bitcoin. But a lot of people who get involved in Bitcoin don't realize that when you have an account at one of the main exchanges, in fact, they're holding that Bitcoin for you. And it's only when you move that Bitcoin off of the exchange and put it onto one of your wallets, the hot or the cold, whatever. But if you move the Bitcoin onto one of your wallets, it's only then that you hold your Bitcoin. And we believe very, very, very firmly in this power proposition of Bitcoin that you need to hold it to be sovereign. So at Bull Bitcoin, we do not hold any Bitcoin for any one of our users. In fact, as soon as you buy Bitcoin with us, we'll ask you, where do you want us to send it? And we'll simply send it straight out to your wallet. So self-custody is one of the foundational values that we have here at Bull Bitcoin. And we believe in it thoroughly, and we'll always make sure that you're holding your Bitcoin in the right way. And that's why we're bringing you these types of presentations today, is to equip you with some of the knowledge, get to ask some of the questions, and find out how you can hold Bitcoin securely and give you that peace of mind. We got the guys from Bitcoin Mentor, so we'll be getting into their services a little bit later on. But if you do have any type of technical questions, you want assistance, you want somebody to just help you through the process and a bit of a sounding board, they'll listen to you. They'll take on board everything that you need. They'll find strategies that'll get you where you need to go. It's the top quality service. We're super lucky. This is a world-class service that Bitcoin Mentor are offering. And as we can see, it's based in Canada as well. We're super lucky in Canada in some ways. Like, let's not get too pessimistic on Canada. We have an amazing exchange and we have some amazing mentors. So I'd recommend heavily to leverage these whilst they're at your disposition through Liberty Dispatch. We've got Bull Bitcoin, Bitcoin Mentor, and Liberty Dispatch all teamed up together. This is essentially what you need to ensure some financial sovereignty. Okay, so let's jump into it, the 3-part webinar series. So if you haven't already checked parts 1 and parts 2, they're being recorded as well, and we're going to put them up live in the next few weeks. So you can check out Bitcoin for Freedom, which was our first session. We looked at the value proposition of Bitcoin, how it can increase our freedom, our privacy, and resist censorship. And then we looked at Bitcoin 101, which is basically getting under the hood of Bitcoin, how it works, what's the difference between Bitcoin the asset and Bitcoin the network, and what some of these keywords like nodes, miners, and what they all do. So if you want a bit more technical analysis of Bitcoin itself, I recommend that session 2. This is session 3. We're going to look into how to hodl. Okay, so just a little bit of a summary here about what Bitcoin is. So it can be a sticking point because Bitcoin is a mix of everything you don't know about computers mixed with everything you don't know about money. It's okay to feel a little bit out of your depth at the start. It's a slow process. What I recommend is try and absorb as much content as possible. Ask the right questions when you get the opportunity. And if you ever need any extra support, reach out to us or the mentors or Liberty Dispatch, and make sure you're always moving closer to learning more about how computers work and more about how money works. This is why I work in education, because I really believe that education is an empowerment tool. The more you understand, the more you can take that financial responsibility into your own hands and move forward towards your destiny. Okay, also, that thing I was mentioning about some of the activation energy that's required. Let's go. There we go, that's a bit better. There we go. So some of that activation energy that's required when you're learning Bitcoin, it does take like a threshold of persistence. It depends how advanced you want to get and how much you want to know at the end of the day. To use Bitcoin in a simple way, you don't actually need that much knowledge. A lot of people want to understand the entire ecosystem before getting involved in Bitcoin. And that's fine. A lot of people want to protect their money, even if it's sat there in the bank and you're losing on inflation. I understand that you work hard for that money and you want to protect it. So when you're moving into Bitcoin, you might want to move slowly, and that's absolutely fine. But there is a certain activation energy required. And this is listening to webinars, reading some books, talking with some people, heading to a meetup. It can be anything you need, but make sure you're always aware that you're moving towards that activation energy where you'll be able to break through and then you'll feel confident in what you're doing. Because at the end of the day, that's what you need to feel. It's not listening to one or two podcasts where you're going to feel fully confident. You're going to want to build that confidence on your own. And we're here to help you with some educational tools. But at the end of the day, it's in your hands. So keep on fighting away and learning about all this beautiful system, because I guarantee you, once you burst through that threshold, you open a whole new world of financial freedom. All right. How to hodl. Let's have a look at this. So Bitcoiners use this word hodl, H-O-D-L, and we use it quite often, and it is jargon, to be honest. It's an internet geeky term, which means more than it actually was intended to mean. At the basis, it was a typo. This is a forum post from Bitcoin Talk forum, and there was a guy who was late night holding Bitcoin whilst Bitcoin was essentially crashing in price. The price was coming way down, and this guy was finding it hard to see the price come down and down and down. And he said, basically, I am hodling. He meant to say, I am holding. He was showing his resilience in the face of adversity. He knew the price was going down. He knew that people were trading, but he sent an alarm shot and was like, no, if we believe enough in this sound money, we know that the limited supply, we know the mechanics of Bitcoin are going to work, that eventually the price will increase. And because I understand Bitcoin well enough, I'm going to hold it with conviction. Now, the problem is he was writing this at early in the morning, and I think he'd had one or two drinks. So the fingers were a bit heavy on the keyboard. So instead of H-O-L-D, he wrote H-O-D-L. And that's where the term hodl came from. And then eventually the Bitcoiners, as people on the internet like to do, we kind of overthought this thing a little bit. And hodl became an acronym for the words hold on for dear life. So if you hear somebody saying, oh yeah, I'm hodling, you know, if the price were 100,000 US approximately at the time of recording, if the price comes down to, I don't know, 80 or 70 or even $50,000, you'll find thousands of Bitcoiners across Twitter, across the social networks saying, I'm just going to hodl. And that basically means that they're going to hold on to their Bitcoin because they know that the mechanics of Bitcoin are going to work in their favor on a longer term. So they're not going to sell short and sell at a loss anything that they've bought because they see the long-term value of Bitcoin. So when you are getting involved in Bitcoin, it's good to be aware that the price does move up and down. And at some point in the future, you may be required to hodl yourself. And you've got to ask, is that something that I'm ready to do? And the way to be able to guarantee that that answer is a yes is by not overcommitting. There are some people who want to throw everything in and within a few months see if they make a ridiculous profit. Now, it can work, but also it could not work. It's good to be conservative with the amounts you do put into Bitcoin at the start, because then you can build up this type of tolerance to prices going up and down. For example, I always give this anecdote of back in 2020, the price of Bitcoin was going up and up and up on a daily basis. It was going up by a couple % every day. And I saw this as a student and I was like, great, I'm going to make some quick cash here. I had about $750 put to one side for my rent money. And I decided, hey, I'm going to buy $750 of Bitcoin. And I guarantee within the next 3 weeks, it's going to go up. I could make an extra 50, $100, and then I'll cash it out and I'll pay my rent. And it seemed like a relatively good idea at the time. You know, it was an opportunity. But the problem was the price came down. As soon as I bought almost, the price started coming down, not by a lot, but, you know, by 2, 3, 4, 5%. By the end of the month, I was short about $20 on my rent. And that's a position you don't want to be in, because I had to sell my Bitcoin at a loss because I had requirements on a monthly basis. So if you are looking at getting involved in Bitcoin, do look at your expenditures. Do look at how much you need to cover for yourself, your partner, your family, whatever it may be, the outgoing, the subscriptions, the bills, the mortgage payments. Don't put that money into Bitcoin right now. There are some Bitcoiners who have all of their money allocated to Bitcoin, but they become price agnostic. And they're able to sell because they're already kind of broken through. They've had in Bitcoin for long enough that if they bought it 3, 4, 5 years ago, you're at a profit even if the price has gone down. But in the next few months, we'll see the price hopefully go up because of where we are in terms of the halving. But also we could see the price come down. So don't go and do what I did. Don't put your rent money in there thinking you're going to spin it up in 3 weeks, because you might end up a little bit under the water. And this is where hodling comes from. You have to have a long-term mindset to be able to see that in the future, the value is going to increase because it's been built into how it works. So this is what hodl means. We've basically got to have this kind of hold mentality. And I always love this scene. It's, you know, a lot of Bitcoiners use this. This is Mel Gibson in Braveheart. And the English are charging on. And to be able to stay strong, they have to hold longer than they're willing to. They want to charge into battle or maybe retreat, but you have to have that inner conviction that you're going to stand your ground, because we've worked out that the money is broken. Bitcoin is a solution. We're here for our freedoms, and we're not going to move. And another way to think about Bitcoin is in terms of its scarcity. Now, another great analogy of Bitcoin is it's because we have 21 million Bitcoin, it's a limited amount. It's almost like beachfront property, or like I was explaining to a friend today, we don't live by the beach. So I was saying it's like lakeside property. There's maybe a better Canadian example here. Imagine you have a lake, and around the lake, you only have a set amount of land. You have a fixed amount of land available for developing properties. So if you get in early, you could probably pick up land for super cheap. But as people build around the lake, space gets limited and the price will go up. So if you're selling your lakeside or beachfront property at a time when things might be a little bit difficult, you might not be able to get back in at that price again. And this is the opportunity cost of overcommitting or overanalyzing or thinking, hey, I'm going to wait until the price comes down. Beachfront property, once it's sold out, there's no creating extra beachfront property. Same with lakeside property. Once you've got everybody built around the lake, it's too late to get in. And this might take a few years, you know, in terms of Bitcoin, the 21 million supply is going to last for another 50, 60, 70, 100 years. You know, it's going to take a long time for Bitcoin to be able to be fully issued, but it's a scarce asset. That's what I'm driving at here. The scarcity of Bitcoin means that if you have it, you want to hold it for as long as possible, because in the future, you might not be able to get it back at the same price, and you might not even be able to get back the same amount again. A lot of people want to buy one whole Bitcoin. That's a falsehood. You can buy a fraction of a Bitcoin. It's digital, it's divisible, right? That's what makes it sound money. But it was possible to buy a whole Bitcoin 10 years ago for a fraction of what it is now. So if I had 5 Bitcoin 5 years ago and I sold it all, I wouldn't have the possibility to get back 5 Bitcoin today. I do not have $500,000 to buy back that Bitcoin. So it's kind of something that you want to get in on early and hold it without having to sell it. So gauge where you want to be at in terms of how much you want to buy and how much you want to position yourself in holding this sovereign asset, and try and hold it for as long as possible. Another example is, in terms of scarcity, is like buying land on the moon. But this is a totally different analogy here, because there's a difference between being exposed to Bitcoin, having it in your portfolio, and actually holding Bitcoin in your own possession. Now, what I mean here is a lot of people, they kind of like the proposition of ETFs and of stocks in MicroStrategy or other businesses that are exposed to Bitcoin. And that way, yes, you can leverage all of your registered account programs and saving investments, such as RRSPs. You can get your tax-free savings accounts. You can put some of that money allocated to an exposure to Bitcoin. And some people do think if they have the ETF, for example, with one of the big companies, it's being offered by loads of companies now, from BlackRock to Fidelity to all of these different big investment firms. They offer a Bitcoin product, but it's exactly that. It's a Bitcoin product. It's not Bitcoin itself. You're giving them money, and they're maybe buying Bitcoin in your name, and they're exposing you to that price. But at the end of the day, you don't hold the Bitcoin yourself. And this is why I'm talking about the moon here. I'm not sure if you guys remember, but I do anyway. You used to be able to get these things. Now, these things were like really popular back in the early days of the internet, like around the end of the 90s, 2000s. People were buying certificates for patches of land on the moon. And it was kind of like a fad, or something you'd buy like your dad because you didn't know what to buy him. You bought him golf clubs, you bought him a knife, you bought him all the dad stuff, and you're like, I'll just buy him a patch of land on the moon, it'll be funny. Essentially, the Bitcoin ETF is like this. It's a promise that you've got something that they have, but you'll never hold. If you buy into the ETF, you'll never hold the Bitcoin that's supposedly behind it. So we do distinguish very clearly between Bitcoin, the asset, and Bitcoin, the speculative price, which you'll have on the ETF. And for me, hodling is owning and holding your Bitcoin. It's not just investing in Bitcoin through some promissory certificate, because essentially it's like owning land on the moon. You can't go there and claim it. You can't cash it out. You can't stake a claim. I can't build a house on the moon if I have one of these deeds. It's just a piece of paper that says I own something. And that's what the ETF is as well. It's not the same as holding the asset. And this is how we basically describe it in Bitcoin. We have this key phrase, which is, well, sorry, key phrase, play on words here. An important phrase, which is not your keys, not your coins. You'll see this all over the place as well. When people talk about hodling, we'll talk about not your keys, not your coins. So what does that exactly mean? Bitcoin is held in a wallet. And a wallet is essentially, it can be a hardware device or something that's downloaded and installed on your telephone or on your computer. But basically they run as a program, a script, and the script will manage your Bitcoin for you. Just like a physical wallet, essentially, it'll be able to check the balance, it'll be able to generate addresses, and most importantly, it'll be able to authorize transactions. Now, this is a super complicated diagram. You don't need to master all of this. They're pretty complex and they're pretty well designed. And in fact, you can set up wallets for all of your family once you start to master how they work. But from a starting point of view, I always use this analogy. Basically, when we say not your keys, not your coins, it's because to move Bitcoin, you need to be able to sign every transaction. Every transaction before it leaves the wallet requires a signature. And the analogy I use is it's like back in the days when you used to write out checks. You could write out a check and you have to put the date on there. You have to put who you're paying it to, and you have to put the amount you want to pay them. But if that check's not signed, it won't be cashed at the bank. And Bitcoin works in the exact same way. You can create a transaction. You need to put where you're sending it to and how much you're sending. But before it can leave, you need to sign it. And in fact, because we're in a digital world, we do away with the pen. There's no pen. What there is a key. And the key will unlock the transaction being sent. It's the digital signature. And this is what the wallet does. This is one of the key parts of a wallet. And this is where the security becomes important. Because if this key is compromised, meaning somebody takes it, meaning it's shared with somebody accidentally, meaning it's not very robust, then essentially somebody can copy your signature. Or they can use your signature to be able to send transactions without your permission. So it's almost like somebody could forge your signature on a check and cash checks in your name. So you want to keep this key super safe. And if we come back to the ETFs and even the exchanges, if you have your money on a Bitcoin exchange or a cryptocurrency exchange, they actually hold the keys to your Bitcoin. So if you think about it, without this key, you're not able to authorize any transactions. So do you even own the Bitcoin if you're not able to control it yourself? And this is where this phrase comes from. Not your keys, not your coin. You need to be able to hold that private key so you can authorize the transactions yourselves. And that makes you a holder of Bitcoin. So like I said, they can kind of, these wallets can come in one of two formats. But remember, each one has its own private key, which is how you authorize the transaction. On the left, we have a mobile wallet. These are applications. There's lots of different types. Here at Bull Bitcoin, we have our own app. It's a wallet that will have private keys on it. You can secure these and you can recover them. They use a system of 12 or 24 words. But essentially, it's an app that you download onto your phone. And this app will allow you to do all the things a wallet will do: check your balances, generate addresses, and importantly, authorize transactions. So that's on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side, we have a separate hardware device, and we call these hardware wallets because it's a physical device that you can buy. And the advantage of having a unique device dedicated to authorizing these transactions is, unlike the hot wallet or the cell phone, the application on the left-hand side, the digital device on the right-hand side is never connected to the internet. So this keeps your keys even safer. If it never touches the internet, then there's no risk of malware, there's no risk of hacking, there's no risk of accidentally sharing something into the cloud. Your keys are kept fully offline, and the wallet will be able to sign the check or sign that transaction without ever touching the internet. So your signature is kept super, super safe. So we distinguish between these types of wallet by calling one a hot wallet, and we call the other one a cold wallet. As you can imagine, the hot wallet is the one that's connected to the internet. So these are things like mobile apps or an app you might install on your desktop computer, because both of those devices, the cell phone and the computer, they're both connected to the internet. So essentially your keys live on that app, but that app, it does communicate with the internet. So there's a slight temperature risk. That's why we call it a hot wallet. The cold wallet is more like the deep freezer. You know, if you keep about where you keep your food, you keep like your winter hunting state, you keep it in a deep freeze. And a cold wallet, which is a separate device, will keep your keys offline at all times. So that's a big distinction to make. And you can have both. In fact, the beauty of Bitcoin is you can have as many accounts as you want. So a hot wallet is more convenient. You know, there's one that's more secure than the other, but like everything in life, the more secure it is, the less convenient it does become, unfortunately. So you can leverage each one of these. You can use a hot wallet for day-to-day transactions, paying bills at the end of the month, heading out to town, or if you're traveling somewhere, you can take money in a hot wallet quite easily. You can budget and use small amounts with that hot wallet. With a cold wallet, that's where you want to be keeping more of your long-term savings, your inheritance to your family, your rainy day fund, anything that's super, super important to you. We do recommend that you keep these in cold wallets so you can keep them offline and you can sleep safe. All right, we're just rounding up here, but we're going to get into some different types of custody solutions. We're going to chat with the mentors, guys, but just some best practices before we jump into that. So as I mentioned at the start, never leave your Bitcoin on an exchange. You've heard about different scandals, such as there was, first of all, there was Mt. Gox. I was thinking of that for a second. Mt. Gox, a long time ago, was an exchange. They mismanaged the funds and they went bust. Then after that, there was Quadriga. They mismanaged the funds and they went bust. And then after that was FTX, and they mismanaged the funds and they went bust. So you kind of get the pattern here. The idea of you being sovereign and you being free and Bitcoin enabling that freedom is about you taking that into your own hands. It's a bearer asset. And if you're leaving it on an exchange, you're trusting them with this asset. And it doesn't always work out very well. So leverage that, bring the Bitcoin over to yourself and be able to hold it yourself. And then no matter what happens in the news, if you open up the news one day and you see that an exchange went broke or they got hacked or whatever, they mismanaged funds, you know that your Bitcoin's safe because you're holding it yourself. You're your own bank. Also, when backing up wallets, and it is important to back them up, because if you lose your cell phone without backing it up, you've kind of lost access to that private key. Also, with the hardware devices, if you lose those devices and you haven't backed it up, excuse me, you lose access to that private key. So you can back up each one of these wallets, whether they're hot or cold, by just writing down 12 or 24 words. It's a really simple process, but in the worst situations where you may have lost one of your wallets, whether it be through fire, theft, leaving in the back of a taxi cab, the dog could have got hold of it and buried it in the yard, whatever can happen to all of these different devices. If you have these backup words, you'll be able to replace the device and regain access to your Bitcoin using 12 or 24 words. It's super simple, but it's the most important step. These recovery phrases, because they're so powerful, you don't ever want to put them online. So a lot of people, like when you go to the grocery store, you'll write out a list or get given a list, usually by your spouse, and it'll be everything you need to pick up at the grocery store. And what I usually do is I take a photo of that thing. So I have it with me when I go to the grocery store. But my photo is going up onto the cloud. And the cloud is used by Apple, Google, OneDrive, Proton, whoever. But essentially, they would have access to your private key as well. So never, never, never take a photo of your backup phrase. That's super important. Also, just genuine online health. Never click any suspicious links. Always check your recovery plan as well. You can recover the wallet. It's like testing the fire escape before there's a fire. You can test the recovery process to make sure your words are written down correctly. Don't use a storage solution that exceeds your technical ability. A lot of people want to double down on Bitcoin security, but actually the large majority of Bitcoin is lost through human error. So move slowly through these processes. when you're securing a Bitcoin, make sure you know what you're doing, make sure you know how it works, and make sure you know how to recover it. Because if you go charging into very complex custody solutions, you actually risk locking yourself out of your Bitcoin. And that's honestly the biggest risk, is locking yourself out. So there are different ways we can help you through this process, and we're going to get into it a little bit now, but those are some of the best practices.